Right. I'd like you all to imagine that you're on your way to meet a friend for a cup of coffee, and your path takes you past a shallow pond. And in this pond, there's a small child, and this child is obviously in danger of drowning. Now, you can rescue this child. There's no sharks in the pond. There's not a big undercurrent, but you're going to pay a price. You're going to wreck your shoes. You're probably going to mess up your pants a bit. You're going to be late for your coffee. So what do? Do you rescue the child? I hope so. I mean, what would you say if you didn't? Oh, I'm sorry, kid. These are Ferragamos. Enjoy your swim. It's not going to play. Now, this has been used by Peter Singer with a twist. He says that we have this same relationship with people in absolute poverty on the other side of the planet. Now, the idea of humanity as a moral community is nothing new. It goes back at least 2,500 years. But what's changed recently is that it's become a practical moral community. Everyone in this room and everyone watching this talk probably has the ability to be the difference between life and death for someone who they'll never meet. You know, they say for the price of a cup of coffee, you can change a life. And it's completely true. But the analogy doesn't quite work. I mean, if I see a child in a pond, I can rescue them fairly simply. You know, I walk in, pick her up, walk out, done. Now, I guess I could fly to sub-Saharan Africa with a very small briefcase of my life savings and fling it into the street, but I'm not going to do that. I mean, one, we expect our moral obligations to allow us to live a fairly normal life, and that's not really a normal life. But more importantly, that's not going to change anything. It's not going to solve the underlying causes of global poverty. Instead, we give to transnational philanthropic organizations, TPOs. Now, they take our money, they formulate a plan about how to help people in desperate poverty, and then they implement it. It's far more effective, and we all give, well, most of us give, but we don't normally think about these organizations and how complex they are. So what I want to talk about tonight is why we should have some reservations about how these organizations practice philanthropy. But first, let's have some background. When we talk about a transnational philanthropic organization, we're talking about a formally constituted organization. It has a corporate structure that's ongoing. It's not an informal social movement. It's private, so it's not associated with a government or something like the United Nations. It's independent, so it sets its own goals. It's not for profit, obviously. And it's directed towards some sort of good. And the good in our case is the relief of global poverty. So let's talk about the facts. This is a growth industry. As of 2007, it was a $10 billion a year industry. If you factor in private-public partnerships, it goes up to $23 billion. More than a dozen of these organizations have budgets in excess of $100 million. The big ones, like CARE and CRS, have budgets of about $500 million. The biggest one, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, has an endowment of about $34 billion. They spend about $2.4 billion a year on poverty-related causes. And to contextualize that, that's comparable to what Australia gives in official development assistance, and is far greater than what Austria gives in Portugal. Now, some of you may think that this is relatively small money, you know, $23 billion. But you need to compare that to the people who they're helping. As of 2005, it was estimated that about 45% of the human population was living below the World Bank's poverty line. And that's $2.50 a day, purchasing power adjusted. So they can buy what $2.50 will buy you in a city like New York or Toronto or London. I think we can all agree that's not a lot of money. So you have these organizations that are very powerful and these people who are very vulnerable. So why worry? I mean, they do good things. I mean, is this like standing by the pond while someone's rescuing the kid and being like, you're doing it wrong, I could do it much better than you? No, I don't think so, because the relationships are so much more complicated. So imagine two of the most popular ways that we interact with transnational philanthropies. We often see video and photos of a celebrity in a village in the developing world. They're beaming at the children are beaming at them. It's like a Bernini statue. Or we have the ads that come about at Christmas time, where you have John Lennon playing in the background and you have a kid with big saucer eyes and a distended stomach and flies on their face. And, you know, it's disturbing. But it's not disturbing only because these people are in desperate poverty. It's disturbing because they idealize the donors, people like us, and they infantilize the people who we're trying to help. And that's why they kind of remind me of images like this. From the Empire Marketing Board in the 1930s, promoting the British Empire. Also like this. If you replace this chappie with a graduate student, you might have an accurate example of a lot of aid that goes on right now. And for this reason, the transnational philanthropy has been called the white savior industrial complex, or the mendicant orders of empire. But this seems to be very rhetorical. We need to have a precise analytic structure in order to understand what's wrong and how to repair it. Now, I view it as a problem of domination. This is not a new idea. This goes back at least to the Roman Republic, to the Roman historians and the Roman jurists, and it's been revived by people like Quentin Skinner, Philip Pettit, and Frank Lovett, so if you're interested in them. But domination is very basic. It has 4 characteristics. It's a social relationship between agents who are interdependent on each other to achieve their goals. There's asymmetric power in it, so one agent has more power than the other. It's enough to create dependency, so the weaker agent can't exit the relationship without incurring pretty heavy exit costs. And finally, it's arbitrary, meaning that the weaker agent can do nothing to contest or check the power that the stronger agent has. What's an example of this? Slavery is a great example of it. You have masters and slaves in a social relationship. The master has more power than the slave. There's enough to create dependency. Runaway slaves from Spartacus through to Dred Scott have not fared very well. And the power's arbitrary. The slave can't contest what the master does because they are owned by them. Now, is transnational philanthropy like this? I mean, surely not. But let's have a look. It's a social relationship between donors and recipients. There's obviously an asymmetry of power because we have something that they need. This power creates dependency because what we have and they need is the difference between life and death, living above or below the poverty line. And it's arbitrary. There's a great bit of research done called the Listening Project that did interviews with communities in post-aid situations. And they asked them, what was your experience of this? And they say, well, we were very grateful. We were in a tight spot and they helped us out. But when they start asking them more questions, it comes out, oh, well, they asked us what we needed and they didn't really answer or they didn't respond. They seem to be following their own agendas or the agendas of powerful donors. And we were left out of the decision-making process. So I think we can say it's arbitrary power. But, some of you may resist this conclusion. I mean, I'm going to assume that everyone here is anti-slavery, right? I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer, and everyone should be pro-philanthropy. We think it's wrong for people to own other people, and we think that it's right for people to help others who are in extreme need. But you need to take a step back. Slavery doesn't need to be the sort of exploitative antebellum American South. We can imagine a benevolent slave owner who treats his slaves well, he educates them, clothes them. They enjoy a standard of living far above free people in their society. But we would still not find that acceptable because even a well-looked-after slave is still a slave. And that's the baseline that we should be using. So why should we worry about domination? Well, we think domination is bad because people have a fundamental right to exercise some control over the social relationships that profoundly affect their lives. It goes for slavery and it goes for transnational philanthropy. We should always be wary of people who have control of power because, remembering what Lord Acton said, power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. A case that's relevant for us would be the Sex for Food scandal that broke out in about 2001. And it was very unpleasant. It came to light that young women and girls in refugee camps in West Africa were being sexually exploited by foreign aid workers. And it was exposed by whistleblowers, and afterwards, people asked the victims, why didn't you come forward and complain? Why did this keep on going? And the victims obviously said, well, we didn't know our rights, we didn't know who to talk to, we had no idea about what to do, and we were very afraid that if we complained, the people who were exploiting us would deny us access to food, to education, to shelter, to the fundamentals of life. Now, that's a huge amount of power, so we should always be wary of people who have control over it. And that's why we have principles of justice. Principles of justice allow us to constrain strong agents and empower weak agents. Think about our relationship with the state. The state has a huge capacity to interfere with our lives, but we constrain it with the rule of law, with democracy. We empower people with the welfare state. We need principles of justice to constrain power, and that's what we need for transnational philanthropic organizations. So what can we do? Well, transnational philanthropy is always going to be a social relationship. There's always going to be an imbalance of power. This power will always create dependency because these people are so vulnerable. So we have to address the arbitrariness of power. Now, in an ideal world, we would have something like an international organization that has the ability to monitor transnational philanthropy. If they go pear-shaped, they can intervene, they can somehow get recompense. It'd be great if that happened, but, you know, international politics is a difficult thing. It moves at a snail's pace. There have been attempts to create some sort of organizations like this. The Sphere Project's a great example, so is the Humanitarian Ombudsman, but they've been resisted. These organizations don't want to give up their autonomy, and that's fair enough. They're afraid of becoming cat's paws for other powerful agents. But at the same time, they exercise a great deal of power, and we need to be concerned. And that's where everyone here comes into the picture. The next time you're approached by one of these organizations, and it's almost certain that you will be approached, you have to ask some hard questions. Don't just ask, is my money going to reach the people who I want to help? You have to ask these organizations, are they empowering the people who they're helping in the aid process? Do they have a say? Do they exercise control over what you do? And then ask them, well, how do I know that? How can you assure me? I mean, I don't want to just check your website and see everything's A-okay. Do you have third-party monitoring? These are the tough questions that we have to ask because we have an obligation to help, just like Peter Singer says. But we have an obligation not just to give well. We have an obligation to give justly. Thank you.